Hey guys, what's going on and welcome back to another video. Today I have my PFF Johnny with me. Johnny, where can we find you?
How are you? You can find me on Instagram, threadheads_apparel. Poshmark, it's threadheads with the Z. They had the S taken, and I still haven't been able to track that account down, but that's where you can find me.
You're gonna get it one day. How much would you
One
pay
day.
to get that?
It's a $1 million question. Let's help me find who has it first, and then we can negotiate.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm a marketing geek a little bit, but right now I feel so out of sorts for the last year or two because I don't have it in unison. So we're working on that.
Yeah. So one thing that I think that you do really awesome is just vintage pieces. So is there anything that you could tell us just from the top of your head that sets vintage apart when it comes to every other market on Poshmark or just reselling in general?
So I think for me, right, vintage it's a piece of nostalgia. So the cool thing about vintage is right, it's 20-year period, right? When something's old enough, it's vintage. There's always going to be a market for it. So it's kind of always changing or growing in a sense. So from that capacity, I mean, kind of like how styles are changing with modern clothes and stuff like that. But I mean, each decade kind of has the stuff that it's known for. So I feel like that's really cool, and it speaks to each person and their sense of fashion and how they want to express themselves.
Really good answer. So obviously everything that's over 20 years old is not going to be a gold mine to pick up. How do you
Right.
differentiate between what to leave and what to pick up? Is it just really that nostalgia factor?
To differentiate, right? I mean, once it is vintage, I think that there will be a buyer for it at some point. But what's going to separate something is really, I mean, there's each decade has, right, stuff that it's known for. So in the 80s, it was the crazy neon patterns, and then in the 90s, it was also crazy patterns, but we toned it down a little bit on the neon. It changes throughout each year. So for me, I'm big into the 80s, the 90s. It's kind of the time that I came up in. And it's a piece of nostalgia, but it's also, right, I mean, who in that decade made those pieces famous or who wore it? A lot of pop culture kind of overlaps, sports, stuff like that. People are pretty influential.
Is there any ways that you take that pop culture or things that had made it popular and integrate that into your listing to make buyers able to search for it better?
Yeah, I think especially right now, how it is becoming such a trending fashion statement piece is right, when Travis Scott wears something or Kanye wears something. I think that that makes it more prevalent today. So that way, when you have maybe some of these younger kids that really appreciate the clothing, but they only know it by Travis Scott wore this shirt or Kanye wore this shirt. They don't necessarily know who the band was back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. So these are definitely things that I incorporate in my descriptions and my listings, just to try to make sure that I'm casting my net as wide as possible.
Having that in the description definitely helps people find your items. I'm wondering, however, is there a difference in shoppers when it comes to vintage? Are people just scrolling and they see something that gives them that nostalgia, or do you think that people are trying to specifically seek things out?
I think it's a little bit of both. From what I've seen from my clientele is that you definitely have those people that are coming. They're picking out something more just for maybe they have a theme party or there's a 90s bar crawl or something along those lines, and it's just a piece of nostalgia. And then you have the people that are like vintage heads, and they have 30 plus shirts in their closet. Collectors, I mean, people paying over $200 for t-shirts. I try to at least keep different tiers of vintage, right? I have my volume pieces, my lower dollar amount items, and then I have the stuff that I price high. I leave it high, and I wait for somebody that's going to appreciate it. So you have your different buyers. I think vintage buyers, people who are truly like vintage heads, I think they're sometimes a little bit, from a seller standpoint, a little bit more fun to work with because they know the ins and outs. They know how to authenticate. So when they see something and they see it priced and they still want it, not only do you get to, talk with somebody and network with somebody, but it makes the negotiation a little bit more fun, I think.
So for someone who doesn't sell vintage and they come across this really cool piece, what's your advice for them to figure out how to go about pricing it? Because you just talked a little bit about having your lower volume and your higher volume. Are you looking up comps, or how do you go about pricing?
A little bit of both. I think it's definitely, you want to check your resources and check comps and stuff like that. But it's also, some people may just be thrifting, right? And find something and it's really not their thing. First of all, I'm open, right? Anyone can DM me with questions about vintage, about sneakers, whatever it may be. I like to try to be there and be somebody in the community that kind of helps out. And so, and I also buy in bulk. So if somebody comes across stuff and they're not into vintage, and they just want to get cashed out, come see me. But definitely, right? It's a combination of doing your research. For me, it's also just kind of time in the game of vintage and just kind of learning through my peers and just what people are willing to pay.
And when in doubt, price high. And if you have to lower it,
absolutely, absolutely. Worst thing, somebody can make an offer, or they make a little rude comment, tell you how you're price gouging, or
yeah,
I get
make
them
an
all the
offer
time.
using the button.
What's the lowest that you'll take?
Yeah. So
Love that.
another question I have, and this just might be because I'm a girl and I don't follow sports as much, but do you think that there are things to stay away from when it comes to picking up sports memorabilia? Like, I do know from my husband that sometimes players get traded and then you don't want to get that number and from that team anymore. But are there any other big things like that?
This is a topic I could actually go into some pretty good detail on. So it's going to depend, right? So for somebody that may not be so into sports, it may require a lot of research, and that could obviously deter somebody, but the money's good. So I would encourage people not to let it to deter you to do that research. For me, what I go by is the statement that player made in that city. They may not be a champion, they may not be a Hall of Famer, but maybe they're just a fan favorite. Maybe they're just somebody that people love. Tony Romo, I may get some backlash for this, but Tony Romo didn't win a championship game. He didn't win very many playoff games, but if you ask anybody that's a Dallas Cowboy fan, they love him. So obviously those types of, that's going to make an impact. If they did win a championship, if they did go to the Hall of Fame, that's obviously a easy pickup. But to your point earlier, you have people, that's just kind of the nature of the business where people get traded, people go to free agency, they didn't really make a big enough impact. And a lot of times those types of things, from a fan standpoint, get overlooked and people get forgotten about. And unfortunately, those pieces are not going to be as easy to sell.
I find that there are certain sports that do better. Like, I've seen you sell everything from like football to NASCAR. Do you feel like there's a certain sport that does better in vintage, or is it pretty fair across the board?
It comes seasonally. So as you would expect, right? When baseball comes around, everybody gears up. When football season's coming around, everybody gears up. When coronavirus comes around, everybody's missing their sports. So they're like, sports stuff have been like flying off the racks. Especially Chicago Bulls. Like, that couldn't have been timed any better for like just entertainment's sake of right, our current lockdown situation, this documentary coming out. So like Chicago stuff, I have nothing left.
Yeah. My husband is like listening to sports radio and they're just like talking about the dumbest things on earth because they have nothing to do.
Oh my gosh.
People are missing sports so much.
Check out ESPN The Ocho. You can watch stone skipping. You can watch marble racing. I'm not even kidding. Like, and they announce it as if it's like a real thing. Like as if the marbles have skill to beat one another going downhill. It's crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's what happens. Withdrawals.
All right, switching gears a little bit. If someone really wants to get into vintage, are there any mistakes that you made when you first started that you would warn other people to really avoid making?
Good question. The first thing I think is checking comps, is really knowing what to price your stuff out for. I have people in my comments that tell me very politely, by the way, how highly priced my items are. And when I first started out selling vintage, I go back and I look and I'm like, wow, I sold some stuff like that was like, just again, lack of knowledge, didn't know. So obviously research, knowledge is power. It's going to be able to help you feel top dollar for what your item is. And even if you're a volume seller, just to kind of know how to price yourself competitively. And then the other thing is just kind of understanding how the quality and how shirts were made and what to look for. I've had people come and ask me like, hey, look at all these Banshees, and they're really cool shirts. They would look great in a photo. But the tag like this, for example, is ironed on. So if I stood in this shirt right now, it's got the champion. You might think that it's vintage, but this actually is not, because just little things like that.
What about, because vintage items are older, do you feel like, what's the cutoff for quality, or rather for wear on items?
That's a good question, because there's also a wide variety of people and what their preference is for that. So you have obviously your vintage items that were bought and never worn, and they look like the day they came out of the factory. And then you have some stuff that's pretty tattered, faded, holes. And there's actually a lot of people that are looking for that. They're looking for that patina. They're looking for that wear. I mean, I draw a line. What we'll either try to do is maybe like repurpose them in some way. We're actually, my wife and I are tie-dyeing this big Tommy Hilfiger crew neck, because it's got a really cool flag right here on the chest, but it's got some stains on it, stuff that I personally wouldn't want to put out. So we'll tie-dye it, kind of give it new life, see how it comes out. And if it passes quality control, I'll link it. But I mean, that kind of goes back to your last question, just again, understanding, right, who your buyers are, what they're looking for, and the difference between something that has some patina on it and stuff that's like, all right, that's pretty gross.
So reminiscing back to when you could leave the house, and this doesn't have to be vintage, because I know you sell more than just vintage. Is there a flip that just like really stands out to you as like your favorite of all time? And maybe you didn't even make the most money. Maybe it's just like you said, the nostalgia.
Actually, one of my favorite flips came during lockdown. It was through a neighbor is moving, and they were putting obviously a bunch of stuff out, and I asked them if they needed help moving some boxes. They're kind of an elder couple, and I had my mask and gloves on, taking my precautions and everything. And he came out with this clear bag of crew neck sweatshirts. And I asked him to buy them, and he gave me 8 crew neck t-shirts, or 8 crew neck sweatshirts for like $30. And they were like some of the cleanest. They were all NFL. So there was like 3 or 4 Patriots, 2 Packers, a University of Michigan. That was the first one that sold. And then there was actually a Yankees one. So the reason I thought it was the coolest is just because of how it kind of came to be. Like, I've been living next to this. My family's been living next to these people for 40 or 30 years now, I want to say. And, just trying to be nice, help an older gentleman, and struck a deal. And the Packers, one of them's a Packers one, and it's like a caricature shirt from like players from the 50s and 60s. So that's one that comes to mind, just as like one of my more recent favorite flips, if you will.
Yeah. So I know you have your biases because I know you're a big Cowboys fan, but do you feel, I want to know what you think the top sports teams for resale value, not for personal preference, are when it comes to football, basketball, baseball.
Okay, all right. Hear me out. I, as a child, was a front runner, clearly, but I stuck with my teams. Now, the Yankees are the only team for me that's a local team growing up in New Jersey. A basketball team, I'm a Bulls fan, so The Last Dance is doing it for me right now. And then I'm a Cowboys fan. With that being said, I think when it comes to football, reselling, strictly reselling, the Cowboys are definitely up there. The Patriots are up there. I mean, anybody's got Super Bowls are up there, especially if they were won prior to like within the last 20 years. Oakland Raiders have a good fan base, and they also have some really cool stuff. Basketball, I mean, the Bulls, again, Michael Jordan, the Lakers, the Celtics, Detroit. Detroit has some really cool stuff, especially from the Bad Boys era. And then the throwback Miami Heat jerseys. Those ones are really cool. And then for baseball, bias again, the Yankees, they just have the most championships. Like you can't but although with that being said, the Yankees having the most championships, it's easy to find stuff from the Yankees from the 90s just because of how many they've won. The Red Sox have a really wonderful fan base. They're great people. The Dodgers, and then the two expansion teams in the 90s. So the Colorado Rockies, who my father-in-law played for, and then the Miami Marlins. Those were they have some really cool gear from back then.
So one thing I think is really cool is that you have Kaylee who helps you thrift, but you guys keep your own separate accounts when it comes to Poshmark, and maybe even other platforms, I'm not sure. How does that help with your reselling?
Kaylee actually got me into thrifting. I did not like it at first, but it's nice because you have a second set of hands and you have a second mind who's kind of in line with what you're doing, right? So if it's listing, shipping, finding the items that's sold, the list goes on. Whatever our daily responsibilities are, the stuff that we got to take care of, you just having somebody that you can do it with. Obviously, once we can get back out to thrift stores again, it's just kind of cool. It's something for us that we like to, do a couple times a month. Wink, wink. Do it together. And, just a lot of times, even though we go together, we kind of like split apart. We go on our little treasure hunts and then we come back and we consult with each other. So it's kind of cool. It's, it's, again, it kind of breaks us the monotony of the week up. Yeah. If I have a hard week and we go Saturday, or even like estate sailing, just sourcing in general is just kind of something that we kind of also make like a date.
That's so cool.
She's definitely, I mean, she's only 2 years younger than me. So she kind of came up in the same time frame. So she knows what to look for. And then, especially once kind of the vintage started really selling well for us, she definitely paid more attention to what I was selling while still maintaining her brand and her closet the way that she has it. But when we're going through the racks, I'll get a, "Hey, hon," and she lifts it up way in the air, So it's good. I got two sets of eyes scanning the racks.
So I have to ask, and just be as honest as you can, who finds better vintage, Johnny or Kaylee?
Me. Yeah, I do. It's not even close.
Had to ask.
Right, babe? Who finds better vintage when we're in a thrift store, you or me?
I think he does for sure. Whenever I find vintage pieces, it's usually like the weird, I don't know, like the weird stuff, the yellow jumpsuit that I got. I don't know. Like I'll pick up those, but for like the stuff that people really want and the trendy vintage stuff, he really finds that stuff.
All right, no fights tonight. Look at that. One thing I've been finding when it comes to niche markets is the longer you've been doing it, a lot of people start creating return client bases. Do you feel like you have a return client base from selling vintage?
Yes. I definitely have. So I have one guy. He's the best. Um, just this month alone, he's probably done like $500-600 in sales. I think it's the experience that you make it. I try to really make it an experience, especially like with the vintage. So like I have just little business cards that I'll tag the shirt. So you kind of get that, that popping the tag sensation when you get the shirt. If I have return customers, I'll give them discounts, but I'll also kind of throw in little surprises there, maybe a free shirt that I know their size. You treat your clients good. They definitely come back. They recommend shoppers. Maybe their friends have like styles. So it's been good. It's definitely been good.
Before we go today, are there any PFFs or people in the community that you think we should all be following?
Oh, how much time do you have? The Houston Exchange. That's my guy right there. His girlfriend, it's simply KZ. So I love them too. They're another couple we get to engage with every now and then. The Posh Kings, those are my guys. I mean, there's so many big staple names that you could just drop, right? The Deal Queen, Empty Hanger, of course, Amanda, Abby Hamer. Her Instagram is Thriftitude. Those are definitely some people that I mean, there's so many more, right? We have so many great friends, but yeah, those are some
solid names. So that's a good list.
Yeah.
Well, Johnny, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be a part of this.
Absolutely.
Is there any parting advice you'd like to give everybody?
Yeah, if you have questions on anything vintage, on anything sneakers, definitely I'm open. Feel free to message me. Do your research. That's the first and foremost. I mean, that's the best way to get money in this reselling game, is by knowing what you're looking for or who your buyers are. It's pretty generic, I feel like, though, at this point.
Yeah. Well, that's so awesome. This has been so insightful. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.